Hello, this is Dr. Halisa Elwine. Welcome back to our study in Creation Gospel Workbook 2, The 7 Abominations of the Wicked Land. We've made our way all the way to the 6th seal of Revelation. And in this 6th seal of Revelation, there's a discussion of the 4 angels of the 4 winds who are holding the winds back until the bondservants of Adonai are sealed. As we've studied the 4 winds and the encampments of the 12 tribes and their 4 divisions, we've seen that it's very much an interactive process between the tribes of Israel and the blessings of heaven and the 4 winds. What happens around the world in terms of weather, when we know that weather can impact way more than just how wet the ground is. It can affect whole economies. The weather, the winds, and we know wind is associated with ruach or spirit. It can create the rise and fall of kingdoms. In fact, that's what the sages believe, that these 4 angels that we've been talking about that correspond to the 4 divisions of Israel, they are responsible for the 4 kingdoms of the beast. And remember, the 4 kingdoms of the beast are Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, and Rome. And as I was explaining in the last program, the serpent would be Pharaoh, the serpent of the Nile, the dragon of the deep. His power comes from the water realms. And so when you pull him up on land, he's less effective. In fact, in history, the particular Pharaoh that's associated with this process, he marches his army to Babylon. At that point, he's defeated, and it marks the decline of Egypt's power. Egypt was never as powerful again as after this battle with Babylon. And from there, his authority is passed to a land-based animal. The lion head of Babylon. And we know that the 4 kingdoms are represented by the image of the beast, the golden head, the silver chest, the bronze torso, and then the iron legs, and then the offshoots of the iron legs, which will be mingled iron and clay. Now, Babylon was the golden kingdom, the golden head. Daniel interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And rather than take warning, King Nebuchadnezzar wanted his kingdom to last forever. In Isaiah, it addresses the king of Babylon and points out his goal was to extend his kingdom up into the heavens and to sit on the Mount of the Moed. He wanted to dominate Jerusalem, which he did. But the reason he wanted to dominate Jerusalem is because he wanted to lift his throne up into the heavenlies. And so rather than take note that, Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom will not last forever, instead, he orders that a golden statue, all of gold, of himself be made. He rationalizes that if I bring all the kingdoms of the world in, representatives from all the kingdoms, including these 3 noble Hebrews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were of noble birth. Even though they were subject to him, they were representatives from Judah, and they were of noble birth. He says, if I can get these representatives from all the nations of the earth to bow down to my golden image, then my kingdom will last forever. Which it didn't, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bow. Later, Persia Media takes over the kingdom, and so the authority that was passed from the dragon to the first beast kingdom, the lion kingdom of Babylon, that authority now gets passed down to Persia Media, the silver kingdom, the bear. And Alexander the Great from Greece invades all the way to Persia and actually dies there. His kingdom is influenced by the Persian kingdom that he conquered. And later, as his kingdom is conquered, you can definitely see Greece's influence upon Rome. They share the same gods. The names might be a little bit different, but the myths are basically the same of their gods. And so each kingdom passed something of itself down to the next kingdom. And these 4 beast kingdoms that made up Nebuchadnezzar's statue, from the golden lion head, from the silver bear chest, to the leopard torso, these lead to Rome. And Rome had these offshoots of clay and iron mingled, and the description of them, again, I say, if this interests you, if you're interested in seeing how Pharaoh spawned the 4 beast kingdoms, if you're interested in understanding how the kingdom of Rome came to be characterized as Edom, or the red one, you can find that in a YouTube video on our channel called Muddy Bloody Puddles. You'll find some other videos on there too that discuss it, but I think it's probably distilled down in that one video. At any rate, what we are to understand about these 4 kingdoms is how the sages believed that they gained power. And their belief is that they gained power when Israel went into spiritual decline. Remember the 4 divisions and the 4 faces and the 4 sides. They were to influence the world. The 12 tribes were to influence the world in their encampments. When they began a spiritual decline, then what would happen is a beast kingdom would begin to rise. If Israel, instead of declining, started to arise in spiritual purpose, then you would see the beast kingdom begin to decline. There's never any stasis. If Israel's up, the beast is down. If Israel's down, the beast goes up. It has to be, it's like one presses upon the other. You will never achieve this right here. It's what Israel's doing can raise or lower the kingdom of the beast, something that Israel has rarely taken responsibility for. So at the first sign of spiritual decline, these angels are now having to supervise these rising kingdoms. It's thought that it was during the time of King Solomon that Rome began its ascent, even though it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years away from being the strength that it would later come to be, and still is. Rome didn't ascend until the cracks began to show in the united monarchy. And remember, Solomon was very harsh with his northern brothers. And so some cracks appeared. Solomon brought in foreign wives who began worshiping foreign gods in Israel. Even though that seemed like it was the apex of Israel's spiritual life, it may have reached it, but with the addition of the foreign gods, the foreign wives, all of a sudden we can see it begin to sink even before Solomon's death. And at that point, they say Rome began to rise. And the present exile is still considered, by the way, to be Rome. Even though the Roman Empire of the first century is gone, it's still with us. The same way, remember that the beast kingdoms kind of handed off their influence into the next kingdom? It's the same way. When we look at the mingled iron and clay feet of the image of the beast, the description there is that they will mingle, but they won't be able to marry. In other words, they'll both be in power at the same time, but they won't intermarry. The doctrines that separate them may also, in one sense, bind them together, but they just don't, not to the point that they can intermarry. And if we look historically at the descendants of the Roman Empire, we know that eventually the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire. Its power at that point was not just military power, it became religious power. And even though it was part of that kingdom, nevertheless, it allowed the spread of the gospel. Another kingdom arose at about the same time. The founder of that religion, he learned from Jews, he learned from Christians, and I think this is where we're seeing the mingling of the offshoots there. Again, it's the mingled feet of the Roman Empire. So you have, even to this day, two major religions. They do have similarities. They're like 2 feet. And these two religions, they still mingle on the earth. They still have a foothold on the earth, but they don't marry. You can't put one inside the other and say they're the same thing, no matter how many coexist signs you might see around the world. That's not really what's happening. They're mingling, they'll never marry. So the Roman kingdom was called the Red One. He's identified with Edom. And this present exile is attributed to Rome or Edom, the Red One. We know that Edom originated in the south, but like I said, if you'll go back to the YouTube video called Muddy Bloody Puddles, you'll get more of an idea of how Edom kind of fragmented off and was there at the establishment of Rome. When that reed was planted in the sea, this is where Edom begins to grow in the north, not just the south. So we know that Messiah is thought to be hidden in Edom, knowing that Edom is considered to be the Roman Empire, or we might say even the Roman Church. Somehow within Judaism there was the idea that Messiah would be concealed there until the winds began to blow with "give them up, don't hold back. Ephraim comes trembling from the west." An interesting concept. At least from our point of view, it makes perfect sense why he would be concealed in the north, concealed in a sense in Edom. Those 4 directions, those 4 angels, again, would be in charge of those 4 directions. And so whatever's happening in the book of Revelation, those angels are there to execute the orders. But now, where we saw the numbering, again, of the 144,000 who were being sealed, we can see that once again, the 12 tribes of Israel are about to become a much more active and interactive part of that machine. That now it's not the angels probably feeling like they're working all by themselves, but instead the encampments of the Israelites are about to be settled. And once again, they will be numbered for war. You saw that in the excerpt. So let's look at another place that helps us understand not just the horns, the winds, the angels, the divisions, but how they work together. Where's the central point for measurement? Because if we're going to understand the 4 horns of the altar, and remember the souls were kept under the altar in the 5th seal, we have to understand that these 4 horns in general are relative to the 4 winds. But the center point of those 4 winds, the position by which they're measured, is Jerusalem. So let's look at Zechariah 1:14 through 21. So the angel who was speaking with me said to me, "Proclaim, saying, this is what the Lord of armies says. All right, we've been very army-based in this discussion of the sixth seal, because it goes back to Bamidbar when the 12 tribes were numbered for war. They wanted to be camped and arranged like the hosts, the armies of heaven. So this is what the Lord of armies says. I am exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, but I am very angry with the nations who were carefree. For while I was only a little angry, they furthered the disaster. Therefore, the Lord says this, I will return to Jerusalem with compassion. My house will be built in it, declares the Lord of armies. And a measuring line will be stretched over Jerusalem. Okay, so when we're thinking of the four winds and the four directions, the measuring line stretches over Jerusalem. Again proclaims, saying, this is what the Lord of armies says. My cities will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion, and again choose Jerusalem. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, there were 4 horns. So I said to the angel who was speaking with me, what are these? And he said to me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. There were 4 horns that scattered Israel. Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen, and I said, what are these coming to do? And he said, these are the horns that have scattered Judah so that no one lifts up his head. But these craftsmen have come to frighten them, to throw down the horns of the nations who have lifted up their horns against the land of Judah in order to scatter it. Do you see the turnabout here? From the time of Bamidbar, when the 12 tribes were settled and organized, the 4 divisions were set with the 4 faces to the 4 winds in order to influence the winds to bless the world. And he says, instead, what's happened is these 4 horns have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. And he says they've even scattered Judah so badly that no one lifts up his head. He doesn't want to be counted in a census. That's what it means to lift up the head. But he says, now I've generated these craftsmen to come frighten the nations, to throw down the horns of the nations who lifted up their horns against the land of Judah in order to scatter it. So it's turnabout. The nations, instead of receiving the blessing of Israel, walking in covenant, instead engineered its scattering. And now it's about to be turned about. These craftsmen are going to come, and those who had scattered Israel and Judah, it's now going to be turned about, and now they're going to be called back in from those 4 winds. And so Zechariah 2:6 says, you there, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, because I have spread you out like the 4 winds of the heavens, declares the Lord. And if you read that in a JPS Tanakh, a Jewish Bible, there's a footnote to that. It says, I looked up and I saw 4 horns. And the explanation of the 4 horns is they correspond to the 4 winds. So the 4 horns on the altar point to the 4 winds. Horns represent authority. We've got 4 angels with authority over the 4 winds. We need a restoration where now Israel can take authority over the 4 winds for blessing. But that should help you quite a bit. If you're trying to decode some passages of Revelation, especially as it pertains to horns arising, or how a smaller horn may arise out of the beast who's representing a kingdom, it'll give you a starting point in terms of understanding how the horns, the winds, and the nations are a similar symbol, and how there's angels in authority over them, Those orders come from the throne, but we're pointing toward back toward an interactive time where Israel will be resettled. And once again, they will begin interacting with these four winds. And again, it takes us back to the divine chariot. Think about the altar, the four corners of the altar, the four horns of the altar. The altar is where the souls of the righteous were stored in the fifth seal. Picturing those souls under the altar of the fifth seal, it helps you to see them as living sacrifices. They lived lives of living sacrifice. They did the job that all Israel was supposed to be doing. By living these sacrificial lives for the sake of the commandments, for the sake of their testimony of Yeshua, had there been more than a remnant, had the nation done these things, then the nations could have been like Yeshua. They could have done the work of Yeshua. They could have brought peace to the four winds of the earth. So, how can we individually contribute toward this? We have to do what those souls did. Maybe like Noah, they were pretty alone in their generation. No matter how alone you are, you still have to walk in righteousness that you understand. You still have to maintain your testimony of Yeshua. You still have to walk in the obedience of that covenant that you accepted upon yourself. And so in that sense, when those souls, when they brought in their sacrifices of themselves, it was like placing a sacrifice on the altar of the Mishkan, a sacrifice on the altar of the temple. They were placing themselves within those four horns. They were placing themselves at the disposal of the holy ones to be part of this great divine plan that would allow Israel to be that conduit of blessing out to the nations through the horns of the altar. Because those four wind angels, they're always going to obey their orders. The only question is whether Israel will obey its orders. And once Israel comes into obedience and begins to execute their orders toward the four corners of the earth, toward the four sides of the winds, then it'll become a question, will the nations also obey their orders? But it's the job of Israel to be that watchman, that guard, who can preserve the boundaries of the nations by bringing peace to the four winds, by living sacrificial lives inside the horns of the altar. And so once they're brought back, once Isaiah 43:6 occurs, I will say to the north, give them up. To the south, don't hold back. Bring my sons from afar, my daughters from the ends of the earth. It's not to continue in disobedience. It's to bring them back to their camps. It's to restart this divine machine, to reset this divine machine. And Matthew 24:31, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. It's going to be an organizational trip once we're caught up into that great cloud of witnesses. So, where do the clouds come from? The clouds come from the four winds. And they can encircle and protect and guard the camp of Israel. And they can be these conduits through which Israel can bless the earth so that they can achieve that partnership of the garden that they lost when Adam and Eve sinned. And we don't want to think that it's only Israel that needs to obey. We can't think that, oh, once Israel gets settled in their camps and they start obeying their covenant, then everything will peace, love, That's not exactly right. That'll be an important first step. But the nations are also obligated to walk in righteousness. Because if we look at Noah's flood, that threshold of wickedness was crossed. And it flooded the entire earth. It affected everyone on earth. And I think this is why Zechariah prophesies of a time when the nations of the earth will come up to celebrate the Feast of Sukkot. It's called the Feast of the Nations. And remember, this is when the 70 bulls were offered on behalf of the nations. It was a way, again, of reminding the nations, yes, Israel has a primary responsibility as a kingdom of priests. As the Levitical priests served Israel, so Israel serves the nations. But they also have that responsibility even at their placement. And so we can see in certain temple rituals an acknowledgement, a reminder of the work, not just of the 7 clouds of glory, but also of the 4 winds. We're told that the sheaf offering, the wave offering of the barley that was conducted during the week of Pesach, they would move it forward, they would move it backward, they would move it up, they would move it down, forward, backward. They would continue this movement. It was called the wave offering, and that was to demonstrate honor to the one to whom the world belonged. The one who was sitting on the throne, who did control the 4 winds, who did control the clouds of glory. And the movements forward and backward, it was thought, when they did this in the temple, that it counteracted the effects of those winds. When the 4 winds were blowing in a manner inconsistent with peace and blessing, that it could counteract that. Again, it's giving Israel an interactive role with the 4 winds, that instead of the winds bringing chaos, bringing things out of season, bringing excess or not bringing enough, that this wave offering was to demonstrate how Israel interacted with that process. And it said when it moved up and down, the wave offering, it was moved up and down. It was to counteract the effect of injurious dews. In other words, again, you don't need dew at an improper time. You need rain when you need rain, and you need dew when you need dew. You need rain and dew to do what they do at the proper time, or they're not a blessing. So these waves were to show that Israel, you must interact. You must obey your covenant in order that each of the things that these 4 winds bring, that it is depositing a blessing, not just in the land of Israel itself, but also around the world. And if you've ever participated in the Feast of Sukkot, if you've ever had the privilege of waving a lulav in those 4 directions, it has the same function. It's not showing ownership, that the Creator owns the nations of the earth, but it's also reminding Israel of their obligation to obey their covenant, to rejoice in the Torah every day, so that as they interact with their covenant, that they can also bring some peace and harmony into that interactive plan of heaven, so that they can get used to garden living. Garden living is where mankind becomes part of the rain and the dew process. And because it's interactive, you can see why Adam and Eve were given to rule over. Just like the angels, what are they doing? They're ruling over the 4 winds. And at this point, how much help are we giving them? The message is interact with your covenant. Walk in your covenant. Walk in relationship with the Holy One, and you will actually become a weatherman or a weatherwoman.